Thank you so much, everybody, for attending today. I'll give you something, a background about myself. I'm actually, I guess, first-generation farmer. My parents bought a farm when I was 5 years old, so I grew up belonging to 4-H, feeding 250 hogs every morning, 50 head of cattle, milking 4 goats by hand, and I understand, where family businesses start from and what they take to, within the family. To give you a background about Northland Wealth, we are what's called a Canadian multifamily office. And just asking around the room, has anybody heard of Entertainment One? Do you know what E1 is, the Canadian entertainment company that brings you the Hunger Games, Twilight, The Hobbit, things like that? So we're the family office for the founding family of E1. And it started back in 1973, 2 Italian brothers. There were 5 kids in total. They'd come over from Italy in the 1950s. And they came out of the University of Toronto, and at the time they were the new immigrants to Canada, and they were having a difficult time finding a job. One of the brothers was watching The Partridge Family. So for people over the age of 40, 45, you might remember Susan Day, being the cute teenager. And the one brother said to the other one, well, she's really cute. Wouldn't it be great if we can meet girls like Susan Day? But we can't sing. So it seems like music's a big thing nowadays. How about we get a school bus like the Partridge Family, and instead of singing, we're going to sell records off the back of it, and we'll call it Records on Wheels. So they put $5,000 together. They had a friend put in $1,500, and the friend had told his father what he had done, and the father looked at him and said, son, you've lost all your money. The best investment decision, son, you will ever make, the biggest return you will ever make, is if you can get your money back from these 2 kids. And he used without papers because it was the early 70s. And a month goes by, they give this guy his $1,500 back. His stake at the IPO in 2003 would have been in excess of $65 million liquid, plus earnings from 1973 till 2003. So that $1,500 was probably his biggest mistake to ever get back. But the brothers traveled around for 4 months. They met some great girls at campuses, and these guys were in their young 20s, so it was good for them. But they did that for the summer. They parked their bus on the end of Yonge Street, rent a store, and they start selling records out of the store. So when I was growing up in high school, back in the 80s, the coolest store to go to was Records on Wheels in downtown Toronto, if you could take the GO Transit or a bus there, and get one of their cool picture discs or buy a Led Zeppelin album or Rolling Stones or something. But they were the place to go to. And they built up 100 stores across Canada by the late 1990s, employed almost 1,000 people. And their young nephew, who was about 18 at the time, came to the uncle and said, Uncle Don, this retail thing's pretty cool, but I think we should go into wholesale. And his uncle looked at him and said, well, there's no margins in wholesale. We can't mark it up double. That's stupid. Why would you ever do that? He goes, well, yeah, but there's this thing called Amazon, and then, and downloading didn't exist. And he goes, well, I think maybe, I should talk to them. So he flies over to Hong Kong to a trade show along with their business manager, who's also on the board of Northland. And they talk to Amazon, and they basically hooked the entire European distribution rights for Amazon for anything from DVDs, VHS, records. And that helped them ramp up their revenues. In 2003, income trusts, business trusts were very popular. A lot of families that were looking to get liquid, and the brothers were in their late 50s at the time. Got a great valuation, and they sold out for roughly $250 million. So with that type of wealth, every member gets, what you call that FU money. If you don't want to be part of the cohesive family unit, you don't have to be. You can say, no, I'm married, I'm going to do this, I'm going to move to a tropical island, but I don't want to play anymore, I don't have to. And that wasn't going on so much, but we could see it starting to happen. And when you look at family dynamics and you look at family businesses, you start to see a pattern that is most likely going to happen. And just to give you a quick background, I'm going to flip through this. When you look at the numbers, there's what's called shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And it is a 7 out of 10 chance, and you've probably seen the numbers, a 7 out of 10 chance that your family will not transfer either its business or its wealth to the 2nd generation. And when you look at the transfer to the 3rd generation, it's a 9 out of 10 chance it's not going to happen. And when you go to the 4th, it's 97% chance. And I knew these were the odds with this family. So I went to them and I said, what we need to create for you is a family office. And they said, well, what's that? How does that work? Well, it's not just managing the money. Managing the capital, the financial capital is part of it. But we need to avoid this rags to riches, this rice paddies to rice paddies. Because if we don't start educating your children and your grandchildren now, the likelihood of this wealth disappearing is going to be very high. So I reached out to some industry groups, found Cafe 4 years ago, for instance, found other groups in the United States, whether it was the Institute for Private Investors, whether it was the Family Office Exchange. But these groups would get together, and business families would get together peer-to-peer, just like we're doing today, and share stories about what they need to do to get things right. And fortunately, as the head of the family office for the founders of Entertainment One, I would get access to some very elite families. We've dealt with the Rothschilds, for instance. I know the Rockefellers personally, and that helps. And what we're starting to notice is a few things that any family, whether you're worth $100,000 or you're worth $100 billion, that you need to follow and you need to start putting into action. One of the things that people do need to understand, though, is that most of the failures really are not because of money management. It's not because you've bought the coolest private equity investment. It's not because you didn't have the right tax structure or you didn't have the correct trust structure in place. Most wealth failures come from the breakdown of communication within the family, how the family talks, how the family has governance. All of that matters. And if I asked around the room, how many families here have a family reunion every year? That's not many. And something as simple as that can be the first step to getting things right. Now, one thing that we do understand, and I should bring to everybody's attention, is we know the world changes. And Darwin, in his writings, The Origin of the Species, most people misquote this, but this really captures what families need to do, is they need to adapt. And it's not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It's not the strongest that survives. It's the one that is able to adapt to and adjust best to the changing environment which it finds itself. And if we look at the Burnbrae Farms situation, for instance, they went from milk to eggs. They made the adaptation. They went to larger commercial farms from the small family farms. That change has kept the family going and the family business going. So it's a great example here today. Now, instead of using bigger words like family cohesiveness, strategic planning, mentoring, there's easier ways to look at it. And a family should play together. A family should plan together, work together, communicate together, give together. And then finally, we may even look at the legal structures, the trusts and estates. So when a family plays together, we need to understand that the money, the financial success, is not enough. Money will not solve all the problems. A family needs to communicate its culture, its history, and ritual. If you look at something as simple as a bar mitzvah, as a family celebrating a wedding or a death or a birth. All of that plays a very important role in the culture and the society of the family. Families need to form a social compact, and they need to have shared values. And part of that social compact is understanding what the next generation is looking for, needing, desiring, as well as understanding what the previous generations did prior to that. And what families really need to understand is that the assets are the family members themselves, not the money, not even the business. It's the family itself. Because if the family is functioning, if it was working together, you can have catastrophic losses and you can come back and start again. Because when you look at a family, for instance, such as the Rothschilds, their wealth started in the 1700s. They've gone through the French Revolution. They've gone through the Holocaust, First World War, countries changing, falling, yet they still have their wealth. And part of that is through looking at entitlement a new way. They understand that educating the family is important so that they understand those traditions. But they just don't give them the money all up front. The Rothschilds, for instance, have what's called a family bank. And when you come out of school and you're 22 and you're such and such Rothschild, the 6th or the 7th, you've got great business connections, you've got a phenomenal education, but they just don't give you a trust fund. They don't say, here are the keys, have fun. You can go to their board, to the family board, and say, you know something, I'd like to borrow some money to start a new business. I think this business, I've researched it, I've done the work, I need to borrow the money to start it. Typically they stay in finance, typically they stay in banking because the family knows it, understands it, and can support them on it. But that ability to borrow the money to start over again, every generation, is the head start that the Rothschilds get that you and I don't get. But they're not given the money up front. But when you look at yourselves, when you've started your business the first time and you went to the bank and said, please give me the money, they said, what collateral do you have? You have to prove to us that you don't need the money for us to give you the money. But this wealthy family, they do get the money. And if they don't pay the money back, there goes their trust fund. They're pledging their trust fund to the family to be able to buy the money to start the businesses. And something as simple like that, which anybody can do, whether it's $10,000 to start the business, or $1 million, or in their cases, $5 or $10 million to start. That's the key to getting ahead and to going forward. When families talk together and they plan together, what they find is that they start to define, what wealth means to them, what they really want to get to. And when you start to plan, you're becoming proactive and not reactive. You're setting a vision for the family, for yourself. You're getting buy-in, and that is hugely, it's a huge bonus to have. You need to talk amongst the family about what is the purpose for the wealth. Is it simply to live a great life, fly in private jets? Is it about the ownership and control of a business? Does that make the family happy? Is it about the financial security so that you never have to make that mortgage payment? Or is it just about the family getting along and having good get-togethers every couple of years? Or is it just simply to maintain your standards of living? Each family needs to define that themselves, but they need to have a common ground and a common vision for it and share it together. Now, on planning, and we heard it today earlier on, was knowledge is power. Doing with the knowledge is even more beneficial. And part of the obligations, the duties that the next generations have, is that they need to understand how economics works. They need to understand things like inflation and budgeting and investing. And this can either be taught within the family, or you can go externally to financial professionals to teach it. It's great to plan for major life events. And I know people here, it's awful to buy insurance because you have to talk about things when they change. or what do you do when you're writing a will, or prenuptial agreements that we heard about. But families need to deal with these issues. And the great families will do fire drills around them. What happens if a death happens today? Is everything taken care of? What happens to the business? Who controls the business? Can everybody still get along without the patriarch or the matriarch of the family being there? Part of the communication of the family, and people call it family governance, but it's really about making informed decisions as a family. And that means understanding the eldest generation's current views around the family, as well as the next generations, including spouses or in-laws or outlaws. And it's imperative to get that family harmony and to be on the same page. Family meetings are a great way to start things. And if you want to give responsibility to your children, you can have them at 17 and say, hey, let's start planning a vacation together. Can you go on the internet, do the work? Tell me what it's going to cost. Where should we go? How are we going to do that? But make them start becoming accountable for their actions. And simple things like that are a good way to get started before you're giving them something that's too much power, like a VP of your company at the age of 22. Families need to document agreements. And again, going back to the prenuptials, you need to understand what happens when things go wrong, when people don't agree. What happens if a brother and a brother, or a brother and sister who are running the company as the major shareholders, what happens when they don't agree? Is there a partnership agreement? Is there a mechanism to talk together to resolve these differences? And to understand that ahead of time, as opposed to after the fact, will definitely help the family go forward. Now, a family constitution, really it's just a series of documented family policies. Unofficially, it could be we meet at grandmother's every weekend for a family dinner. This always happens, or every winter we have a family vacation. It can be that simple. And it's the process that's more important than the actual constitution itself. It's about people talking and putting that together in some way, shape, or form. Now, in working together, the next generation to come into the wealth, whether it's the second, third, fourth, they have a responsibility to the family. There is an obligation. And they need to understand what the value of the wealth is. And they need to respect it. How hard did the prior generations have to work to create this financial wealth? And how hard did the generations have to work to still have a cohesive family 2, 3, 4 generations in? And they need to understand what it takes. There's some ways for this financial education to be passed on. Given the way the world works today, video is very, very easy. Family documentaries are great, where you interview the people within the family today so that 50 years, 100 years from now, the kids can look and watch and say, that was my great-grandfather. This is what he did. These were the struggles that he had with my great-grandmother. This is how they got through it. I can get through it too. And that makes a big difference. And again, support for entrepreneurship. This goes back to having a family bank, for instance, with the Rothschilds. When, whether it's a lemonade stand when you're 8 years old and you're selling it on the corner, whether it's a corn stand. I used to have to go sell corn, probably. Roseanne would have to do that as well. But those small steps in business really do help the next generation understand what they're looking for. From a parenting side, one of the most important things is making time for your children. The world's very, very busy nowadays. And with travel, we're constantly traveling, and it's so easy to get on Skype and say, hey, there I am. But to actually make that face-to-face time, to be home at a certain time, to be there when your child scores their first goal or rides their bicycle, making that time really affects the success of the family. It's more important than the business itself. You need to have good expectations for the kids, have good discipline in the family, but also give the children enough room so that they can make mistakes and they can learn from them. Whether it's putting their finger on a hot stove, they need to know that for everything that they do. There are consequences to their actions. And you need to be a good role model, because that's who they look up to the first 10 years of their lives. Not rock stars, not movie stars, but who's in the home. And do they show respect, and do they treat each other well? Now, a family that gives together, if we look at the words philanthropy, they come from Greek. Philos, for the love of, and anthropos, for humankind. So it's the love of humankind. And families that seem to have the best bonds support philanthropy. They give time and knowledge, and they also help the individual at an early age give as well. So one of my friends, his name's Justin Rockefeller, he's on the board of Rockefeller Brothers Foundation. They run about an $850 million foundation. Now, they're not as wealthy as they used to be. If we looked at their wealth going back when their great-grandfather first discovered oil in Texas, their worth today would have been $300–400 billion, like crazy, crazy amounts. And over time, the family's grown. Wealth per individual has dropped because the family, growth is exponential. But they still get together, and they still do a lot of philanthropic things through that foundation, the money that was set aside, so there can be members of the Rockefeller family that are middle class, that have to work for a living, that have to invest and start new businesses to create their wealth that their great-grandfather did. But they still show up, they're still board members, they still understand what that legacy was through the foundation that the family created. With philanthropy, again, you want to start kids at an early age. Whether it's standing out as a Cub Cadet, as an Air Cadet, raising money, selling apples, selling cookies, that's all part of it. Very wealthy families may want to go to a third world country. My wife, for instance, is from Costa Rica, and she went to Nicaragua and spent a month building a school by hand, so that she would understand how people that were not upper middle class in Latin America lived. And that instilled a lot of confidence and understanding of herself and society. This is one area that I seem to run into, and a lot of you probably do, is do we actually tell the next generation how much we're worth? Whether it's a little or a lot, do we even tell them that they're going to get something? Or maybe they'll just figure it out once I pass on. But the internet's an easy thing nowadays. It's pretty easy to figure out in the ballpark what a family's worth. And it's important to have this communication with the next generation, with the heirs, so that they're aware and informed and prepared. But part of it also, especially on the trust side, and we're not even going to get into legal structures, that's really a moot point, is that the beneficiaries and the grantors need to understand what they're doing. The beneficiaries need to understand what their expectations are. The trustees need to understand it as well. What's the role of a beneficiary? Do I just take the money, or do I have to do something for it? What's my responsibility? What do I need to learn? How do I become educated to become a better beneficiary? And the communication between the trustees and the beneficiaries is of utmost importance. Without that, it just becomes family welfare. I get a check every month for $10,000, $100,000 from the trust, and away it goes. That does nothing for anybody, and that is the quickest route to entitlement and to ensuring that the wealth has gone by 3 generations. Now, when you are looking for trustees and advisors that are outside the family, you want to seek people that are called to the work, that this is their life's mission, that this is what they're passionate about, that they'll go the distance with you and your family. And you want to have them, what we call grasshopper minds. They want to be able to jump from situation to situation, from an emergency to something else. They have to be able to react with you quickly and not become paralyzed. Now, just to conclude, the path here for everybody, it's yours to decide. And attending a peer-to-peer networking group such as CAFE is a great first step. There are family offices that you can work with, whether creating your own or working with a multifamily office. And everyone needs to know that that true family wealth is more than just managing your money. It's the family itself. Thank you.